Chapter 4, Psychological Disorders. You must have come across people who are unhappy, troubled, and dissatisfied. Their minds and hearts are filled with sorrow, unrest, and tension, and they feel that they are unable to move ahead in their lives. They feel life is a painful uphill struggle, sometimes not worth living. Famous analytical psychologist Carl Jung has quite remarkably said, "How can I be substantial without casting a shadow? I must have a dark side too, if I am to be whole, and by becoming conscious of my shadow. I remember once more that I am a human being like any other. At times, some of you may have felt nervous before an important examination, tense and concerned about your future career, or anxious when someone close to you was unwell. All of us face major problems at some point of our lives. However, some people have an extreme reaction to the problems and stresses of life. In this chapter, we will try to understand what goes wrong when people develop psychological problems, what are the various signs and symptoms associated with different types of psychological disorders. The study of psychological disorders has intrigued and mystified all cultures for more than 2500 years. Psychological disorders or mental disorders, as they are commonly referred to, like anything unusual, may make us uncomfortable and even a little frightened. Unhappiness, discomfort, anxiety, and unrealized potential are seen all over the world. These failures in living are mainly due to failures in adaptation to life challenges. As you must have studied in the previous chapters, adaptation refers to the person's ability to modify his behavior in response to changing environmental requirements. When the behavior cannot be modified according to the needs of the situation, it is said to be maladaptive. Abnormal psychology is the area within psychology that is focused on maladaptive behavior, its causes, consequences, and treatment. Concepts of abnormality and psychological disorders. Although many definitions of abnormality have been used over the years, none has won universal acceptance. Still, most definitions have certain common features, often called the 4Ds: deviance, distress, dysfunction, and danger. That is, psychological disorders are deviant, different, extreme, unusual, even bizarre, distressing, unpleasant, and upsetting to the person and to others, dysfunctional, interfering with a person's ability to carry out daily activities in a constructive way, and possibly dangerous to the person or to others. This definition is a useful starting point from which we can explore psychological abnormalities. Since the word abnormal literally means away from the normal, it implies deviation from some clearly defined norms or standards. In psychology, we have no ideal model or even a normal model of human behavior to use as a base for comparison. Various approaches have been used in distinguishing between normal and abnormal behaviors. From these approaches, there emerges two basic and conflicting views. The first approach views abnormal behavior as a deviation from social norms. Many psychologists have stated that abnormal is simply a label that is given to a behavior which is deviant from social expectations. Abnormal behavior, thoughts, and emotions are those that differ markedly from a society's ideas of proper functioning. Each society has norms, which are stated or unstated rules for proper conduct. Behaviors, thoughts, and emotions that break societal norms are called abnormal. A society's norms grow from its particular culture, its history, values, institutions, habits, skills, technology, and arts. Thus, a society whose culture values competition and assertiveness may accept aggressive behavior, whereas one that emphasizes cooperation and family values, such as in India, may consider aggressive behavior as unacceptable or even abnormal. A society's values may change over time, causing its views of what is psychologically abnormal to change as well. Serious questions have been raised about this definition. It is based on the assumption that socially accepted behavior is not abnormal and that normality is nothing more than conformity to social norms. The second approach views abnormal behavior as maladaptive. Many psychologists believe that the best criterion for determining the abnormality of behavior is not whether society accepts it, but whether it fosters the well being of the individual and eventually of the group to which he belongs. Well being is not simply maintenance and survival, but also includes growth and fulfillment, that is, the actualization of potential, which you must have studied in Maslow's need hierarchy theory. According to this criterion, conforming behavior can be seen as abnormal if it is maladaptive, that is, if it interferes with optimal functioning and growth. For example, a student in the class prefers prefers to remain silent even when he has questions in his her mind. Describing behavior as maladaptive implies that a problem exists. It also suggests that vulnerability in the individual, inability to cope, or exceptional stress in the environment have led to problems in life. If you talk to people around, you will see that they have vague ideas about psychological disorders that are characterized by superstition, ignorance, and fear. Again, it is commonly believed that psychological disorder is something to be ashamed of. The stigma attached to mental illness means that people are hesitant to consult a doctor or psychologist because they are ashamed of their problems. Actually, psychological disorders, which indicates a failure in adaptation, should be viewed as any other illness. Historical background. To understand psychological disorders, we would require a brief historical account of how these disorders have been viewed over the ages. When we study the history of abnormal psychology, we find that certain theories have occurred over and over again. One ancient theory that is still encountered today holds that abnormal behavior can be explained by the operation of supernatural and magical forces such as evil spirits, bhoot, pret, or the devil shaitan. Exorcism, that is, removing the evil that resides in the individual through counter magic and prayer, is still commonly used. In many societies, the shaman or medicine man, Oja, is a person who is believed to have contact with supernatural forces and is the medium through which spirits communicate with human beings. Through the shaman, an afflicted person can learn which spirits are responsible for his problems and what needs to be done to appease them. A recurring theme in the history of abnormal psychology is the belief that individuals behave strangely because their bodies and their brains are not working properly. This is the biological or organic approach. In the modern era, there is evidence that body and brain processes have been linked to many types of maladaptive behavior. For certain types of disorders, correcting these defective biological processes results in improved functioning. Another approach is the psychological approach. According to this point of view, psychological problems are caused by inadequacies in the way an individual thinks, feels, or perceives the world. All three of these perspectives, supernatural, biological, or organic and psychological, have recurred throughout the history of Western civilization. In the ancient Western world, it was philosophers, physicians of ancient Greece, such as Hippocrates, Socrates, and in particular Plato, who developed the organismic approach and viewed disturbed behavior as arising out of conflicts between emotion and reason. Galen elaborated on the role of the four humors in personal character and temperament. According to him, the material world was made up of four elements with earth, air, fire, and water, which combine to form four essential body fluids, with blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm. Each of these fluids was seen to be responsible for a different temperament. Imbalances among the humors were believed to cause various disorders. This is similar to the Indian notion of the three doshas of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, which are mentioned in the Atharva Veda and Ayurvedic texts. In the Middle Ages, demonology and superstition gained renewed importance in the explanation of abnormal behavior. Demonology related to a belief that people with mental problems were evil, and there are numerous instances of witch hunts during this period. During the early Middle Ages, the Christian spirit of charity prevailed, and Saint Augustine wrote extensively about feelings, mental anguish, and conflict. This laid the groundwork for modern psychodynamic theories of abnormal behavior. The Renaissance period was marked by increased humanism and curiosity about behavior. Johann Weyer emphasized psychological conflict and disturbed interpersonal relationships as causes of psychological disorders. He also insisted that witches were mentally disturbed and required medical, not theological treatment. The 17th and 18th centuries were known as the Age of Reason and Enlightenment, as the scientific method replaced faith and dogma as ways of understanding abnormal behavior. The growth of a scientific attitude towards psychological disorders in the 18th century contributed to the reform movement and to increased compassion for people who suffered from these disorders. Reforms of asylums were initiated in both Europe and America. One aspect of the reform movement was the new inclination for deinstitutionalization, which placed emphasis on providing community care for recovered mentally ill individuals. In recent years, there has been a convergence of these approaches, which has resulted in an interactional or biopsychosocial approach. From this perspective, all three factors, that is biological, psychological, and social, play important roles in influencing the expression and outcome of psychological disorders. Classification of psychological disorders. In order to understand psychological disorders, we need to begin by classifying them. A classification of such disorders consists of a list of categories of specific psychological disorders grouped into various classes on the basis of some shared characteristics. Classifications are useful because they enable users like psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers to communicate with each other about the disorder and help in understanding the causes of psychological disorders and the processes involved in their development and maintenance. The American Psychiatric Association (APA) has published an official manual describing and classifying various kinds of psychological disorders. The current version of it, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition DSM-5, presents discrete clinical criteria which indicate the presence or absence of disorders. The classification scheme officially used in India and elsewhere is the 10th revision of the International Classification of Diseases (ICD-10), which is known as the ICD-10 Classification of Behavioral and Mental Disorders. It was prepared by the World Health Organization (WHO) for each disorder. A description of the main clinical features or symptoms and of other associated features, including diagnostic guidelines, is provided in this scheme. Factors underlying abnormal behavior. In order to understand something as complex as abnormal behavior, psychologists use different approaches. Each approach in use today emphasizes a different aspect of human behavior and explains and treats abnormality in line with that aspect. These approaches also emphasize the role of different factors such as biological, psychological, and interpersonal and socio-cultural factors. We will examine some of the approaches which are currently being used to explain abnormal behavior. Biological factors influence all aspects of our behavior. A wide range of biological factors such as faulty genes, endocrine imbalances, malnutrition, injuries, and other conditions may interfere with normal development and functioning of the human body. These factors may be potential causes of abnormal behavior. We have already come across the biological model. According to this model, abnormal behavior has a biochemical or physiological basis. Biological researchers have found that psychological disorders are often related to problems in the transmission of messages from one neuron to another. A tiny space called synapse separates one neuron from the next, and the message must move across that space. When an electrical impulse reaches a neuron's ending, the nerve ending is stimulated to release a chemical called a neurotransmitter. Studies indicate that abnormal activity by certain neurotransmitters can lead to specific psychological disorders. Anxiety disorders have been linked to low activity of the neurotransmitter gamma aminobutyric acid, GABA, schizophrenia to excess activity of dopamine, and depression to low activity of serotonin. Genetic factors have been linked to bipolar and related disorders, schizophrenia, intellectual disability, and other psychological disorders. Researchers have not, however, been able to identify the specific genes that are the culprits. It appears that in most cases, no single gene is responsible for a particular behavior or psychological disorder. In fact, many genes combine to help bring about our various behaviors and emotional reactions, both functional and dysfunctional. Although there is sound evidence to believe that genetic biochemical factors are involved in mental disorders as diverse as schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, etc., but biology alone cannot account for most mental disorders. There are several psychological models which provide a psychological explanation of mental disorders. These models maintain that psychological and interpersonal factors have a significant role to play in abnormal behavior. These factors include maternal deprivation, separation from the mother, or lack of warmth and stimulation during early years of life, faulty parent child relationships, rejection, overprotection, over permissiveness, faulty discipline, etc. Maladaptive family structures, inadequate or disturbed family, and severe stress. The psychological models include the psychodynamic, behavioral, cognitive, and humanistic existential models. The psychodynamic model is the oldest and most famous of the modern psychological models. Psychodynamic theorists believe Psychodynamic theorists believe that behavior, whether normal or abnormal, is determined by psychological forces within the person of which he is not consciously aware. These internal forces are considered dynamic, that is, they interact with one another, and their interaction gives shape to behavior. Thoughts and emotions. Abnormal symptoms are viewed as the result of conflicts between these forces. This model was first formulated by Freud, who believed that three central forces shape personality: instinctual needs, drives and impulses, id, rational thinking, ego, and moral standards, superego. Freud stated that abnormal behavior is a symbolic expression of unconscious mental conflicts that can be generally traced to early childhood or infancy. Another model that emphasizes the role of psychological factors is the behavioral model. This model states that both normal and abnormal behaviors are learned, and psychological disorders are the result of learning maladaptive ways of behaving. The model concentrates on behaviors that are learned through conditioning and proposes that what has been learned can be unlearned. Learning can take place by classical conditioning, temporal association, in which two events repeatedly occur close together in time. Operant conditioning, behavior is followed by a reward, and social learning, learning by imitating others. These three types of conditioning account for behavior, whether adaptive or maladaptive. Psychological factors are also emphasized by the cognitive model. This model states that abnormal functioning can result from cognitive problems. People may hold assumptions and attitudes about themselves that are irrational and inaccurate. People may also repeatedly think in illogical ways and make overgeneralizations. That is, they may draw broad negative conclusions on the basis of a single insignificant event. Another psychological model is the humanistic existential model, which focuses on broader aspects of human existence. Humanists believe that human beings are born with a natural tendency to be friendly, cooperative, and constructive, and are driven to self actualize, that is, to fulfill this potential for goodness and growth. Existentialists believe that from birth we have total freedom to give meaning to our existence or to avoid that responsibility. Those who shirk from this responsibility would live empty, inauthentic, and dysfunctional lives. In addition to the biological and psycho-social factors, socio-cultural factors such as war and violence, group prejudice and discrimination, economic and employment problems, and rapid social change put stress on most of us and can also lead to psychological problems in some individuals. According to the socio-cultural model, abnormal behavior is best understood in light of the social and cultural forces that influence an individual as behavior is shaped by societal force factors such as family structure and communication, social networks, societal conditions, and societal labels and roles become more important. It has been found that certain family systems are likely to produce abnormal functioning in individual members. Some families have an enmeshed structure in which the members are over involved in each other's activities, thoughts, and feelings. Children from this kind of family may have difficulty in becoming independent in life. The broader social networks in which people operate include their social and professional relationships. Studies have shown that people who are isolated and lack social support that is strong and fulfilling interpersonal relationships in their lives are likely to become more depressed and remain depressed longer than those who have good friendships. Social cultural theorists also believe that abnormal functioning is influenced by the societal labels and roles assigned to troubled people. When people break the norms of their society, they are called deviant and mentally ill. Such labels tend to stick such labels tend to stick so that the person may be viewed as crazy and encouraged to act sick. The person gradually learns to accept and play the sick role and functions in a disturbed manner. In addition to these models, one of the most widely accepted explanation of abnormal behavior has been provided by the diathesis stress model. This model states that psychological disorders develop when a diathesis biological predisposition to the disorder is set off by a stressful situation. This model has three components. The first is the diathesis or the presence of some biological aberration which may be inherited. The second component is that the diathesis may carry a vulnerability to develop a psychological disorder. This means that the person is at risk or predisposed to develop the disorder. The third component is the presence of pathogenic stressors, that is, factor stressors that may lead to psychopathology. If such at risk persons are exposed to these stressors, their predisposition may actually evolve into a disorder. This model has been applied to several disorders, including anxiety, depression, and schizophrenia. Major psychological disorders. Anxiety disorders. One day while driving home, Dev felt his heart beating rapidly. He started sweating profusely and even felt short of breath. He was so scared that he stopped the car and stepped out. In the next few months, these attacks increased, and now he was hesitant to drive for fear of being caught in traffic during an attack. Deb started feeling that he had gone crazy and would die. Soon he remained indoors and refused to move out of the house. We experience anxiety when we are waiting to take an examination or to visit a dentist or even to give a solo performance. This is normal and expected and even motivates us to do our task well. On the other hand, high levels of anxiety that are distressing and interfere with effective functioning indicate the presence of an anxiety disorder, the most common category of psychological disorders. Everyone has worries and fears. The term anxiety is usually defined as a diffuse, vague, very unpleasant feeling of fear and apprehension. The anxious individual also shows combinations of the following symptoms: rapid heart rate, shortness of breath, diarrhea, loss of appetite, fainting, dizziness, sweating, sleeplessness, frequent urination, and tremors. There are many types of anxiety disorders. They include generalized anxiety disorder, which consists of prolonged, vague, unexplained, and intense fears that are not attached to any particular object. The symptoms include worry and apprehensive feelings about the future, hypervigilance, which involves constantly scanning the environment for dangers. It is marked by motor tension, as a result of which the person is unable to relax, is restless and visibly shaky and tense. Another type of anxiety disorder is panic disorder, which consists of recurrent anxiety attacks in which the person experiences intense terror. A panic attack denotes an abrupt surge of intense anxiety rising to a peak when thoughts of a particular stimuli are present. Such thoughts occur in an unpredictable manner. The clinical features include shortness of breath, dizziness, trembling, palpitations, choking, nausea, chest pain, or discomfort. Fear of going crazy, losing control, or dying. You might have met or heard of someone who was afraid to travel in a lift or climb to the 10th floor of a building or refused to enter a room if he saw a lizard. You may have also felt it yourself or seen a friend unable to speak a word of a well memorized and rehearsed speech before an audience. These kinds of fears are termed as phobias. People who have phobias have irrational fears related to specific objects, people, or situations. Phobias often develop gradually or begin with a generalized anxiety disorder. Phobias can be grouped into three main types, that is, specific phobias, social phobias, and agoraphobia. Specific phobias are the most commonly occurring type of phobia. This group includes irrational fears such as intense fear of a certain type of animal or of being in an enclosed space, intense and incapacitating fear and embarrassment when dealing with others characterizes social anxiety disorder. Social phobia. Agoraphobia is the term used when people develop a fear of entering unfamiliar situations. Many people with agoraphobia are afraid of leaving their home, so their ability to carry out normal life activities is severely limited. Separation anxiety disorder (SAD) is another type of anxiety disorder. Individuals with separation anxiety disorder are fearful and anxious about separation from attachment figures to an extent that is developmentally not appropriate. Children with SAD may have difficulty being in a room by themselves, going to school alone, are fearful of entering new situations and clinch to and shadow their parents' every move. To avoid separation, children with SAD may fuss, scream, throw severe tantrums, or make suicidal gestures. Obsessive compulsive and related disorders. Have you ever noticed someone washing their hands every time they touch something, or washing even things like coins, or stepping only within the patterns on the floor or road while walking? People affected by obsessive compulsive disorder are unable to control their preoccupation with specific ideas or are unable to prevent themselves from repeatedly carrying out a particular act or series of acts that affect their ability to carry out normal activities. Obsessive behavior is the ability to stop thinking about a particular idea or topic. The person involved often finds these thoughts to be unpleasant and shameful. Compulsive behavior is the need to perform certain behaviors over and over again. Many compulsions deal with counting, ordering, checking, touching, and washing. Other disorders in this category include hoarding disorder, trichotillomania, hair pulling disorder, excoriation, skin picking disorder. Trauma and stress related disorders. Very often, people who have been caught in a natural disaster such as tsunami or have been victims of bomb blasts by terrorists or been in a serious accident or in a war related situation experience post traumatic stress disorder PTSD. PTSD, that is post traumatic stress disorder, symptoms vary widely but may include recurrent dreams, flashbacks, impaired concentration, and emotional numbing. Adjustment disorders and acute stress disorder are also included under this category. Somatic symptom and related disorders, these are conditions in which there are physical symptoms in the absence of a physical disease. In these disorders, the individual has psychological difficulties and complains of physical symptoms for which there is no biological cause. These include conversion disorders, somatic symptom disorder, and illness anxiety disorder, among others. Somatic symptom disorder involves a person having persistent body related symptoms which may or may not be related to any serious medical condition. People with this disorder tend to be overly preoccupied with their symptoms and they continually worry about their health and make frequent visits to doctors. As a result, they experience significant distress and disturbances in their daily life. Illness anxiety disorder involves persistent preoccupation about developing a serious illness and constantly Worrying about this possibility. This is accompanied by anxiety about one's health. Individuals with illness anxiety disorder are overly concerned about undiagnosed disease. Negative diagnostic results do not respond to assurance by doctors and are easily alarmed about illness, such as on hearing about someone else's ill health or some such news. In general, both somatic symptom disorder and illness anxiety disorder are concerned with medical illnesses, but the difference lies in the way this concern is expressed. In the case of somatic symptom disorder, this expression is in terms of physical complaints, while in case of illness anxiety disorder, as the name suggests, it is the anxiety which is the main concern. The symptoms of conversion disorders are the reported loss of part or all of some basic body functions, paralysis, blindness, deafness, and difficulty in walking are generally among the symptoms reported. These symptoms often occur after a stressful experience and may be quite sudden. Dissociative disorders. Dissociation can be viewed as severance of the connections between ideas and emotions. Dissociation involves feelings of unreality, estrangement, depersonalization, sometimes a loss or shift of identity, sudden and temporary alterations of consciousness that blot out painful experiences are a defining characteristic of dissociative disorders. Conditions included in this are dissociative amnesia, dissociative identity disorder, and depersonalization, derealization disorders. Salient features of somatic symptom and related disorders and dissociative disorders we can see in box 4.1. Dissociative amnesia is characterized by extensive but selective memory loss that has no known organic cause. For example, head injury. Some people cannot remember anything about their past. Others can no longer recall specific events, people, places, or objects, while the memory for other events remains intact. A part of dissociative amnesia is dissociative fear. Essential feature of this could be an unexpected travel away from home and workplace, the assumption of a new identity, and the inability to recall the previous identity. The few usually ends when the person suddenly wakes up with no memory of the events that occurred during the fugue. This disorder is often associated with an overwhelming stress. Dissociative identity disorder, often referred to as multiple personality, is the most dramatic of the dissociative disorders. It is often characterized with traumatic experiences in childhood. In this disorder, the person assumes alternate personalities that may or may not be aware of each other. Depersonalization, derealization disorder involves a dream-like state in which the person has a sense of being separated both from self and from reality. In depersonalization, there is a change of self-perception and the person's sense of reality is temporarily lost or changed. Major anxiety disorders and their symptoms. First, generalized anxiety disorder, prolonged, vague, unexplained, and intense fears that have no object, accompanied by hypervigilance and motor tension. 2. Panic disorder, frequent anxiety attacks characterized by feelings of intense terror and dread, unpredictable panic attacks along with physiological symptoms like breathlessness, palpitations, trembling, dizziness, and a sense of losing control or even dying. 3. Specific phobia, irrational fears related to specific objects, interactions with others, and unfamiliar situations. 4. Separation anxiety disorder, extreme distress when expecting or going through separation or from home or other significant people to whom the individual is immensely attached to. 5. Other disorders included under this category are selective mutism, substance medication induced anxiety disorder due to another medical condition, etc. Salient features of somatic symptom and related disorders and dissociative disorders. Somatic symptom and related disorders, dissociative disorders. Somatic symptom disorder, the person experiences body related symptoms in the absence of any medical condition, or even if medical condition is present, it is not as serious as the symptoms presented. Dissociative amnesia, the person is unable to recall important personal information often related to a stressful and traumatic report. The extent of forgetting is beyond normal. Illness anxiety disorder, the person experiences worry about the possibility of developing a serious medical condition. Depersonalization, derealization disorder, the person experiences a change in the person's sense of reality and perception of self. Conversion, the person suffers from a loss or impairment of motor or sensory function, for example, paralysis, blindness, etc., that has no physical cause but may be a response to stress and psychological problems. Dissociative identity, multiple personality disorder, the person exhibits two or more separate and contrasting personalities generally associated with a history of abuse. Depressive disorders, one of the most widely prevalent and recognized of all mental disorders is depression. Depression covers a variety of negative moods and behavioral changes. Depression can refer to a symptom or a disorder. In day to day life, we often use the term depression to refer to normal feelings of after a significant loss, such as the breakup of a relationship or the failure of to attain a significant goal. Major depressive disorder is defined as a period of depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure in most activities, together with other symptoms which may include change in body weight, constant sleep problems, tiredness, inability to think clearly, agitation, greatly slowed behavior, and thoughts of death and suicide. Other symptoms include excessive guilt or feelings of worthlessness. Factors predisposing towards depression: genetic makeup or heredity is an important risk factor for major depression and other depressive disorders. Age is also a risk factor. For instance, women are particularly at risk during young adulthood, while for men, the risk is highest in early middle age. Similarly, gender also plays a great role in this differential risk addition. For example, women in comparison to men are more likely to report a depressive disorder. Other risk factors are experiencing negative life events and lack of social support. Bipolar and related disorders. Bipolar 1 disorder involves both mania and depression, which are alternately present and sometimes interrupted by periods of normal mood. Manic episodes rarely appear by themselves, they usually alternate with depression. Bipolar mood disorders were earlier referred to as manic depressive disorders. Some examples of types of both bipolar and related disorders include bipolar 1 disorder, bipolar 2 disorder, and cyclothymic disorder. Every suicide is a misfortune. Suicide takes place throughout the life. Suicide is a result of complex interface of biological, genetic, psychological, sociological, cultural, and environmental factors. Some other risk factors are having mental disorders, especially depression and alcohol use disorders, going through natural disasters, experiencing violence, abuse, or loss, and isolation at any stage of life. Previous suicidal attempt is the strongest risk factor. Often, suicidal behavior indicates difficulties in problem solving, stress management, and emotional expression. Suicidal thoughts lead to suicidal action only when acting on these thoughts seems to be the only way out of a person's difficulties. These thoughts are heightened under acute emotional distress. The ramifications of suicide on social circle and communities tend to be devastating and long lasting. The stigma surrounding suicide continues despite recent advances in research in this field. Due to this, many people who are contemplating or even attempting suicide do not seek help, thus preventing timely help from reaching them. Therefore, improving identification, referral, and management of behavior are crucial for preventing suicide. Therefore, we need to identify vulnerability, comprehend the circumstances leading to such behavior, and accordingly plan interventions. Suicides are preventable. There is a need for a comprehensive multi-sectoral approach where the government, media, and society and civil society all play important role as stakeholders. Some measures suggested by WHO include: first, limiting access to the means of suicide report; second, reporting of suicidal media in a responsible way; third, bringing in alcohol related policies; four, early identification, treatment, and care of people at risk; 5. Training health workers in assessing and managing for suicide; next, care for people who attempted suicide and providing community support. Identifying students in distress. Any unexpected or striking change affecting the adolescent's performance, attendance, or behavior should be taken seriously, such as: first, lack of interest in common activities; Second, declining grades. Third, decreasing effort. Fourth, misbehavior in the classroom. Five, mysterious or repeated absence. 6. Smoking or drinking or drug misuse. Strengthening students' self esteem. Having a positive self esteem is important in face of distress and helps in coping adequately. In order to foster positive self esteem in children, the following approaches can be useful. First, accentuating positive life experiences to develop positive identity. This increases confidence in self. Second, providing opportunities for development of physical, social, and vocational skills. Third, establishing a trustful communication. For goals for the students should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, to be completed within a relevant time frame. Schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders. Schizophrenia is the descriptive term for a group of psychotic disorders in which personal, social, and occupational functioning deteriorate as a result of disturbed thought processes, strange perceptions, unusual emotional states, and motor abnormalities. It is a debilitating disorder. The social and psychological cause of schizophrenia tremendous both to patients as well as to their families and society. Symptoms of schizophrenia. The symptoms of schizophrenia can be grouped into three categories with positive symptoms, that is excesses of thought, emotion, and behavior. Negative symptoms, that is deficits of thought, emotion, and behavior, and psychomotor symptoms. Positive symptoms are pathological excesses or bizarre additions to a person's behavior, delusions, disorganized thinking and speech, heightened perception, and hallucinations, and inappropriate affect are the ones most often found in schizophrenia. Many people with schizophrenia develop delusions. A delusion is a false belief that is firmly held on inadequate grounds. It is not affected by rational argument and has no basis in reality. Delusions of persecution are the most common in schizophrenia. People with this delusion believe that they are being plotted against, spied on, slandered, threatened, attacked, or deliberately victimized. People with schizophrenia may also experience delusions of reference in which they attach special and personal meaning to the actions of others or to objects and events. In delusions of grandeur, people believe themselves to be specially empowered persons, and in delusions of control, they believe that their feelings, thoughts, and actions are controlled by others. People with schizophrenia may not be able to think logically and may speak in peculiar ways. These formal thought disorders can make communication extremely difficult. These include rapidly shifting from one topic to another so that the normal structure of thinking is muddled and becomes illogical, loosening of associations, derailment, inventing new words or phrases, neologisms, and persistent and appropriate repetition of the same thoughts, perseveration. People with schizophrenia may have hallucinations, that is, perceptions that occur in the absence of external stimuli. Auditory hallucinations are most common in schizophrenia. Patients hear sounds or voices that speak words, phrases, and sentences directly to the patient. Second person hallucination or talk to one another, referring to the patient as she, he. Third person hallucination. Hallucinations can also involve the other senses. These include tactile hallucinations, that is, forms of tingling, burning; somatic hallucination, that is, something happening inside the body, such as a snake crawling inside one's stomach; visual hallucination, that is, perception of color or distinct visions of people or objects; gustatory hallucinations, that is, food or drink taste strange; and olfactory hallucinations, that is, smell of poison or smoke. People with schizophrenia also show inappropriate affect, that is, emotions that are unsuited to the situation. Negative symptoms are pathological deficits and include poverty of speech, blunted and flat affect, loss of volition, and social withdrawal. People with schizophrenia show alogia or poverty of speech, that is, a reduction in speech and speech content. Many people with schizophrenia show less anger, sadness, joy, and other feelings than most people do. Thus, they have blunted affect. Some show no emotions at all a condition known as flat affect. Also, patients with schizophrenia experience avolition or apathy and an inability to start or complete a course of action. People with this disorder may withdraw socially and become totally focused on their own ideas and fantasies. People with schizophrenia also show psychomotor symptoms. They move less spontaneously or make odd grimaces and gestures. These symptoms may take extreme forms known as catatonia. People in a catatonia stupor remain motionless and silent for long stretches of time. Some show catatonic rigidity, that is, maintaining a rigid upright posture for hours. Others exhibit catatonic posturing, that is, assuming awkward, bizarre positions for long periods of time. Neurodevelopmental disorders. A common feature of the neurodevelopmental disorders is that they manifest in the early stage of development. Often the symptoms appear before the child enters school or during the early stage of schooling. These disorders result in hampering school, social, academic, and occupational functioning. These get characterized as deficits or excesses in a particular behavior or delays in achieving a particular age appropriate behavior. We will now discuss several disorders like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disability, and specific learning disorder. These disorders, if not attended, can lead to more serious and chronic disorders as the child moves into adulthood. The two main features of ADHD are inattention and hyperactivity, impulsivity. Children who are inattentive find it difficult to sustain mental effort during work or play. They have a hard time keeping their minds on any one thing or in following instructions. Common complaints are that the child does not listen, cannot concentrate, does not follow instructions, is disorganized, easily distracted, forgetful, does not finish the assignments, and is quick to lose interest in boring activities. Children who are impulsive seem unable to control their immediate reactions or to think before they act. They find it difficult to wait or take turns, have difficulty resisting immediate temptations or delaying gratification. Minor mishaps such as knocking things over are common, whereas more serious accidents and injuries can also occur. Hyperactivity also takes many forms. Children with ADHD are in constant motion, sitting still through a lesson is impossible for them. The child may fidget, squirm, climb, and run around the room aimlessly. Parents and teachers describe them as driven by a motor, always on the go, and talk incessantly. Autism spectrum disorder is characterized by widespread impairments in social. Autism spectrum disorder is characterized by widespread impairments in social interaction and communication skills and stereotype patterns of behaviors, interests, and activities. Children with autism spectrum disorder have marked difficulties in social interaction and communication across different contexts, a restricted range of interest, and strong desire for routine. About 70% of children with autism spectrum disorder have intellectual disabilities. Children with autism spectrum disorder experience profound difficulties in relating to other people. They are unable to initiate social behavior and seem unresponsive to other people's feelings. They are unable to share experiences or emotions with others. They also show serious abnormalities in communication and language that persist over time. Many of them never develop speech. Those who do have repetitive and deviant speech patterns. Such children often show narrow patterns of interest and repetitive behaviors such as lining up objects or stereotyped body movements such as rocking. These motor movements may be self-stimulatory such as hand flapping or self-injurious such as banging their head against the wall. Due to the nature of these difficulties in terms of verbal and non-verbal communication, individuals with autism spectrum disorder tend to experience difficulties in starting, maintaining, and even understanding relationships. We have already read about variations in chapter 1. Intellectual disability refers to below average intellectual functioning with an IQ of approximately 70 or below, and deficits or impairments in adaptive behavior, that is, in the areas of communication, self care, home living, social interpersonal skills, functional academic skills, work, etc., which are manifested before the age of 18 years. We can see in table 4.2 describing characteristics of the intellectual disabled persons. In case of specific learning disorder, the individual experiences difficulty in perceiving or processing information
efficiently and accurately. These get manifested during early school years and the individual encounters problems in basic skills in reading, writing, and or mathematics. The affected child tends to perform below average for her his age. However, individuals may be able to reach acceptable performance levels with additional inputs and efforts. Specific learning disorder is likely to impair functioning and performance in activities occupations dependent on the related skills. Disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders. The disorders included under this category are oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and others. Children with oppositional defiant disorder (ODD) display age inappropriate amounts of stubbornness, are irritable, defiant, disobedient, and behave in a hostile manner. Individuals with ODD do not see themselves as angry, oppositional, or defiant and often justify their behavior as reaction to circumstances demands. Thus, the symptoms of the disorder become entangled with the problematic interactions with others. The terms conduct disorder and antisocial behavior refer to age inappropriate actions and attitudes that violate family expectations, societal norms, and the personal or property rights of others. The behaviors typical of conduct disorder include aggressive actions that cause or threaten harm to people or animals, non aggressive conduct that causes property damage, major deceitfulness or theft, and serious rule violations. Children show many different types of aggressive behavior, such as verbal aggression, that is, name calling, swearing; physical aggression, that is, hitting, fighting; hostile aggression, that is, directed at inflicting injury to others; and proactive aggression, that is, dominating and bullying others without provocation. Feeding and eating disorders. Another group of disorders which are of special interest to young people are eating disorders. These include anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating. In anorexia nervosa, the individual has a distorted body image that leads him to see herself himself as overweight, often refusing to eat, exercising compulsively, and developing unusual habits such as refusing to eat in front of others. A person with anorexia may lose large amounts of weight and even starve herself himself to death. In bulimia nervosa, the individual may eat excessive amounts of food, then purge his body of food by using medicines such as laxatives or diuretics, or by vomiting. The person often feels disgusted and ashamed when he binges and is relieved of tension and negative emotions after purging. In binge eating, there are frequent episodes of out of control eating. The individual tends to eat at a higher speed than normal and continues eating till he feels uncomfortably full. In fact, large amount of food may be eaten even when the individual is not feeling hungry. Substance related and addictive disorders. Addictive behavior, whether it involves excessive intake of high calorie food resulting in extreme obesity or involving the abuse of substances such as alcohol or cocaine, is one of the most severe problems being faced by society today. Disorders relating to maladaptive behaviors resulting from regular and consistent use of the substance involved are included under substance related and addictive disorders. These disorders include problems associated with the use and abuse of alcohol, cocaine, tobacco, and opioids, among others, which alter the way people think, feel, and behave. While there are many disorders listed under this category, few frequently used substances are discussed. First, alcohol. People who abuse alcohol drink large amounts regularly and rely on it to help them face difficult situations. Eventually, the drinking interferes with their social behavior and ability to think and work. Their bodies then build up a tolerance for alcohol and they need to drink even greater amounts to feel its effects. They also experience withdrawal responses when they stop drinking. Alcoholism destroys millions of families, social relationships, and careers. Intoxicated drivers are responsible for many road accidents. It also has serious effects on the children of persons with this disorder. These children have higher rates of psychological problems, particularly anxiety, depression, phobias, and substance related disorders. Excessive drinking can seriously damage physical health. Some of the ill effects of alcohol on health and psychological functioning are: first, all alcohol beverages contain ethyl alcohol. Second, this chemical is absorbed into the blood and carried into the central nervous system, brain, and spinal cord, where it depresses or slows down functioning. Third, ethyl alcohol depresses those areas in the brain that control judgment and inhibition. People become more talkative and friendly, and they feel more confident and happy. As alcohol is absorbed, it affects other areas of the brain. For example, drinkers are unable to make sound judgments, speech becomes less careful and less clear, and memory falters. Many people become emotional, loud, and aggressive. Motor difficulties increase. For example, people becomes unsteady when they walk and clumsy in performing simple activities. Vision becomes blurred and they have trouble in hearing. They have difficulty in driving or in solving simple problems. Characteristics of individuals with different levels of intellectual disability. Area functioning: mild IQ range 55 to approximately 70, moderate IQ range 35 to 40 to approximately 50 to 55, severe IQ is equal to 20 to 25 to approximately 35 to 40, and profound IQ below 20 to 25. Self-help skills: feeds and stresses self and cares for own toilet needs, has difficulties and requires training but can learn adequate self-help skills. No skills to partial skills, but some can care for personal needs on limited basis. Speech and communication: receptive and expressive language is adequate, understands communication. Receptive and expressive language is adequate, has speech problems. Receptive language is limited, expressive language is poor. Academics: optimal learning environment. Third to sixth grade, very few academic skills. First to second grade is maximal, no academic skills. Social skills: has friends, can learn to adjust quickly, capable of making friends but has difficulty in many social situations, not capable of having real friends, no social interactions. Vocational adjustment: can hold a job competitive to semi competitive, primarily unskilled work. Sheltered work environment usually needs consistent supervision, generally no employment, usually needs constant care. Adult living usually marries, has children, needs helps during stress, usually doesn't marry or have children, dependent. No marriage or children, always dependent on others. Cocaine. Regular use of cocaine may lead to a pattern of abuse in which the person may be intoxicated throughout the day and function poorly in social relationships and at work. It may also cause problems in short term memory and attention. Dependence may develop so that cocaine dominates the person's life. More of the drug is needed to get the desired effects, and stopping it results in feelings of depression, fatigue, sleep problems, irritability, and anxiety. Cocaine poses serious dangers. It has a dangerous effects on psychological functioning and physical well-being. Some of the are commonly abused substances following the DSM-5 classification. First, alcohol. Second, stimulants. T Dix, dextroamphetamines, methamphetamines, cocaine. Third, caffeine, coffee, tea, caffeinated soda, analgesics, chocolate, cocoa. Fourth, cannabis, marijuana or bhang. 5, hallucinogens, LSD, mescaline. Next, inhalants, gasoline, glue, paint thinners, spray paints, typewriter correction fluid, sprays. Tobacco, cigarettes, bidi, opioid, morphine, heroin, cough syrup, painkillers, analgesics, anesthetics, sedatives, hypnotics, or anxiolytics, sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medication. Summarizing the chapter: first, abnormal behavior is behavior that is deviant, distressing, dysfunctional, and dangerous. Those behaviors are seen as abnormal which represent a deviation from social norms and which interfere with optimal functioning and growth. Second, in the history of abnormal behavior, the three perspectives are, that is the supernatural and the biological, organic, and the psychological. In interactional or biopsychosocial approach, all three factors, viz. biological, psychological, and social, play important roles in psychological disorders. 3. Classification of psychological disorders has been done by the WHO, ICD-10, and the American Psychiatric Association, DSM-5. 4. A variety of models have been used to explain abnormal behavior. These are the biological, psychodynamic, behavioral, cognitive, humanistic, existential, diathesis, stress systems, and socio-cultural approaches. Next, the major psychological disorders include anxiety, obsessive compulsive and related trauma, and stress related somatic symptom and related dissociative, depressive, bipolar and related schizophrenia spectrum, and other psychotic neurodevelopmental disruptive impulse control and conduct, feeding and eating, and substance related and addictive disorders. Thank you.